you took a 4-year break from kind of deal making in the world. What changed over that 4 years? Deal making any different? What changed?
I'd say the biggest single change is AI. And I will say in the beginning, quite frankly, I didn't get it and see this. But I will say, again, I separate the valuations of AI companies from the use of AI. And I mean, I do think this is extraordinary. I mean, this reminds me of, when Lotus 1-2-3 came out, which, a lot of people
you and I were using
a lot of people here are too old to remember that. But it was, all of a sudden, people who knew how to use personal computers, right? It was like revolutionary. I mean, I remember on the trading desk at Goldman Sachs, we literally, it was like, we had these digital decks that were, kind of the beginning of getting things off mainframes. And then all of a sudden one day we showed up and we got a PC. And this was like the greatest thing. We could automatically just start changing all the hedging ratios. I do think now for people, if I were a young person, kind of as opposed to going into computer coding, people who understand how to prompt the AI. And what's both powerful and dangerous is like you and I could take the same LLM, we could put in different prompts and we could get different results. So I think phase one of what's really powerful is all of a sudden you have all this information and things that used to require me to have analysts or research analysts, I can like find in 30 seconds. So I think that the use case of information, I think the second component of the predictive nature of this is a little bit further, but things like call centers, I mean, the AI is so much more efficient and so much more customer friendly because quite frankly, the AI knows the answers to basic things that humans have to follow a computer screen. So I'd say the impact of AI is the single biggest change I see. So I think we have to be careful not relying on it, but I do think kind of, every single business has to look at from an efficiency standpoint and a customer standpoint. How you use it.
Absolutely.
So hopefully, kind of these investment banking analysts won't have 100-hour work weeks when they know how to use AI.
It will be a journey for sure. But in 1984, when I started, it took 6 hours to do a common stock comparison. You were in the microfiche, pulling out back issues of the Wall Street Journal. It now takes 2 minutes. Give smart people powerful tools. They can do more impactful and interesting things. And that's good for a business like ours.
I agree.
Yeah, good for a business like ours for sure. You've managed through some extraordinary high stakes negotiations in both the private sector and the public sector. Leadership lessons about making decisions under pressure or dealing with, very, very difficult situations.
Look, I think the answer is, you're never going to have perfect information. And, the issue is more about execution than it is necessarily having perfect predictive nature. I mean, for me, by far the hardest situation ever was sitting in the Oval Office when the president decided to shut down the economy because of COVID. And, I had to start with calling airline CEOs and telling them that they couldn't fly their planes from Europe back to the US, which was just an extraordinary time. And I was negotiating with Congress. And, one of the there were a lot of really important aspects of what we did, but one of the things that was pretty controversial at the time was, what do we do with the airlines? Should we bail out the airlines? And fortunately, we got into the bill a provision where a combination of payments and loans, we were able to keep the airline solvent because, my view was you would have had not even a bankrupt airline industry. There was no way the airline industry could survive with zero revenues. And then you took that into every single aspect of the economy. I remember saying, we could have unemployment to 25% because it was simple math. 50% of the small businesses, 50% of the businesses were small businesses. They were going to let everybody go.
Yeah.
And we came out with PPP as a way of basically paying people to keep people on their payroll. So I think kind of execution is really, really important.
Just as we're wrapping up, we have a few more minutes. You built a super active private investment platform, in Hollywood. And, one of the things that's interesting. You've deployed capital in traditional financial assets. You've run a bank. You've also deployed capital in creative industries that are much more complex. How do you think about, the differences in those different kinds of investments? How do you frame that? Because those are very, very different things.
Yeah, I'd say that, the two things I've focused on mostly in my career are technology and financials. And by the way, at Goldman Sachs, as you know, I spent most of my career on the trading desk.
Yep.
But I was a huge user of technology, and Hank Paulson ultimately asked me to run technology
became the CIO.
across the firm. And it was really, he saw the impact of technology really having a huge impact on everything we did. So when we started investing in film, it was actually more of a bet on technology than a bet on creativity. And our theory was relatively simple, that any one film was really risky. If you invested in 50 or 100 films, you diversified and you had content. And when we first started investing, this was before Netflix, before the iPad, but I understood what was going to happen with cable bandwidth to the home. And as people got faster and faster internet, I thought that the number one thing people would want is content. Yeah. Now, we're in a completely different world today. There's too much content. And, what we call TV now competes with film. So, I would say it's a more challenging investment environment.